Welcome to Tenak Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting to you live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with a brand new series, Torah Talk. This week, we have our very first pilot episode with my dear friend, Ira Michelson, coming to you straight from the Holy Land in Israel. And so without further ado, I'll introduce you to the man of the hour, literally, Ira Michelson. Boker Tov, good morning, my friend. Ira Michelson, how are you? And thank you so much for doing this. Thank you.
On the mountain, and it's a pleasure to be here, Willem. Or William.
William's good. That works. I really want to, I'm so excited about this, Ira, and I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am, because in my transition stage, as I mentioned to you before, coming out of the Messianic movement, right after I got in it, I was really hungry for teachings that the church didn't provide. And so the best place I could find was on Chabad.org, because I could download up to 20 per day. They have a maximum of, I think, 20 or 22 downloads per day. And I always maxed them all out. I've got like thousands of audio MP3 files on my phone. And I've listened to all of them on the Torah portion. Man, I tell you what, it was just the most fascinating resource but it was really the only one I could find where there was a substantial amount. And that's why I'm so excited about this, to be able to provide this even on a video format, and having teachers like you and others who are going to come in and share this whole experience on a regular basis. And yes, sir.
I was going to say, it's humbling to me that, with the pool of teachers that we have out there, with so many of us that are doing this kind of work, it's humbling to me that you would ask me to kind of kick off this new series. And it's interesting, what you're saying is really true, because I get contacted by so many people on a weekly basis saying to me, where can you direct me to for me to be able to get Torah teachings that I can put on my phone, that I can put on my tablet, things that I can listen to in the car or when I'm at work, because people are so hungry for Torah.
Well, it's incredibly true, because I hear the same questions all the time. And up until, this last month or so, I always referred them to Chabad, because it's such an easy access point.
Sure.
And the main reason and I shared this with you, but I think it's important that I share this with everybody else as well. This whole process, I really felt like it really should start with you. And the reason why is because the whole Tenak Talk thing, if I was to be able to rewind it back in its earliest stage, before it ever even came off the ground, I think you were probably the one person that kind of really set this whole ball in motion. And since you were the very first one there, I thought it would be nice and be an honor for me to have you to pilot this show off and to do the Torah Talk very first episode with the guy who really set me in motion. I thank you for that. So,
well, I'm honored and blessed that I've gotten to meet you and your wonderful family. I think it's amazing that, this is really what it's really about. It's never about, when we're talking about Torah, it's never about the individual. It's never about us trying to elevate ourselves. And when we want to elevate ourselves, we want to elevate ourselves in a spiritual way, but not in an egotistic way where we're trying to, elevate our egos. And so it's always been my desire, in anything that I do, whether it's in business, whether it's with family and so forth, is to get people to model what you're doing. So if in a small way that me coming to Kingsland and interacting with you was able to get you to this place now, to the amazing work that you're doing with Tenak Talk and hopefully this very successful series that we're launching today, Torah Talk, that, that's all that I want. That's all that I ever want, is to be somebody who acts as a bridge. And this is what I tell people. It's easier to be a person who acts as a bridge than to be a bridge burner. And that's what I think we're all trying to do. whether you're listening to the show and you're Jewish, or whether you identify yourself as a ger, or you identify yourself as a Noahide, or you just identify yourself as somebody from the nations, it's much better for us to come together in Torah to try and build a bridge between us to where we can come to the middle of the bridge and meet, rather than having arguments and divisions and so forth. So, I think it's amazing what you're doing, and you are definitely a bridge.
Oh, awesome! Thank you so much, and thanks to and it is really a group effort, from on my end, on your end, because without having teachers like yourself and like the others, and then also like the viewers who are actually supporting what you're teaching, and who really take part in this, it's really just an amazing. It's a beautiful family, and I think for me the most touching part about it is since I have left the Messianic movement and everything else, it seems like all the fighting just sort of dissipated, except for between them and us, of course. But I mean, it seems like most people that I've seen who have left the New Testament really are kind of all climbing on board for the most part. Of course, everybody has a few differences, but for the most part, they're supporting each other. Like us with Jono and Jason and with all these other teachers, and sharing and not trying to hoard. And it's because of that, I think there's more people actually able to witness all this stuff and actually have the opportunity to come out. And so,
sure,
again,
this is only really the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
I've been talking to Rabbi Katz, who literally lives right across the street from me here in Tzfat. And, he was just in Texas, obviously, spoke in Nativ and spoke in many places. And we were talking about how we deal on a daily basis with thousands of people that are leaving their previous faith system and are now exploring where they fit in as it relates to Torah. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. It's nothing. I think Rabbi Skobach said it as well, where Rabbi Skobach said in an interview recently, in an article that I was quoted in as well, where he said that it's his belief that in the next 10 to 20 years, there may be literally full-time people doing this full-time as teachers, just dealing with this, what we call emerging community and burgeoning community. There's kind of a snowball effect taking place where thousands upon thousands of people, and they think they're the only ones, are coming out of idolatry and looking for a place in Torah.
Sure. I know I sure felt alone. And boy,
Sure.
was I sure glad. Man.
Yeah.
It's still,
Amen.
it's
Amen.
it's still, oh man, even a year later, it's still such an emotional, wow.
Sure. Sure. How could it not be when you come to a realization that in a sense, everything, even though you were passionate and your heart was for Hashem and you wanted to be connected to Hashem in the right way, but somehow come to the realization that was not the truth. That was not what you were doing. And then here you come, we have concepts, I talk about this often on the radio show, Talmudic concept of bedieved lachatchila, this idea of there's kind of a way to do things. There's a way to do halacha. There's a way to do the mitzvot. And then there's a way to just kind of skid by, so to speak.
Right.
And so here you are now coming to a place where you want to do things in the right way, be connected to Hashem in the right way. And so how could it not be emotional? How could it not be passionate? Because for the first time in your life, you're not basing your whole relationship with God just based solely on emotion.
Right.
You're now coming to Hashem with a combination of knowledge and emotion in a real good balance, so to speak.
Right. Very good.
But we should get to it, no?
Yes, sir. I think we should. Well, I'm gonna turn this over to you. I may interrupt you with questions from time to time, and I'm actually hoping we'll get interrupted with a phone call or two. So I don't know who's up.
So you see, if you don't interrupt me, it's probably going to go pretty quick because I'm one of these guys that believes in. And if you'll excuse me, I have a problem with my hips. So if you see me kind of moving around, it's not a problem. It's not me being jumpy. It's just trying to find a comfortable place to sit.
That's perfect.
Since I'm sitting for a long period of time speaking to you.
Okay, very good.
Anyway, so we'll get to it and we'll see where we go. So,
all right. Well, I'm going to put
here we are. We're in the weekly Torah portion this week. The Torah portion this week is called Tavo. And Tavo means when you come. it starts off in the first aliyah. There are 7 aliyot. There are 7 goings up, aliyah, like I made aliyah recently. So there are 7 aliyot when men are called to the Torah on Shabbat, before the Torah. And so the first aliyah starts this way. It says, V'haya ki tavo el haaretz, asher Hashem Elokecha, noten lecha nachala, v'yereshta v'yashavta bach. Which basically what I just said was, and it shall be when you come into the land which Hashem your God gives you for an inheritance, to possess it and to dwell there. And it goes on, and I'll read the English, that you shall take of the first of all the fruit. It says, V'lakachta merishit kol pri ha'adama. You shall take the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you shall bring in from the land that Hashem your God has given you, and you shall put it in a basket and go to the place which Hashem your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. And if you don't mind, just so people understand where I'm coming from as an Orthodox Jew, rather than reading the name of God, you're going to hear me say Hashem,
Sure.
Rather than reading Lord or so forth. It just sounds too Christian to me. I'm sorry, but
I totally agree.
So, and then it goes on, Uvata el kohen asher yihyeh bayamim hahem v'amata elav higadti hayom laHashem Elokecha ki vati el haaretz asher nishba Hashem lavotenu latet lanu. And you shall come to the priest that shall be in those days and say to him, and this is where a profession is made when you're bringing this bikurim, these first fruits. There's a profession that says, I profess this day to Hashem, my God, or your God. Actually, he's speaking to the priest, I'm sorry. So he's saying, I profess this day to Hashem, your God, that I am come to the land which Hashem swore unto our fathers to give us. And it says, and the priest shall take the basket out of your hand and set it down before the altar of Hashem your God. Now, so when it says we come to the land and settle it, we're commanded to take the first fruits, and this is called the mitzvah of bikurim. We've already seen the mitzvah of bikurim in the book, or in the parsha of Mishpatim, in the book of Shemot, and it speaks very interestingly about not just any fruit. We'll get into that in a second. It says in Shemot and Parshat Mishpatim, it says Shalosh regalim tachog li bashana. Okay, 3 times you shall keep a feast unto me in the year. And it goes on and talks about them. It says, Et hachag hamatzot, talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You shall keep 7 days and eat unleavened bread as I commanded you at the time appointed in the month of Aviv, for when you came out of Mitzrayim from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. Okay? And then it goes on, V'chag hachatzir bikorei ma'asecha. And the Feast of the Harvest, which is called the first fruits, okay, V'chag HaKatzir, okay, is one of the names of Bikurim.
Okay.
It goes on to say that this is the Feast of the Ingathering at the end of the year when you gather in the labors of your field. Shalosh Pa'amim Bashana Yera'eh Kol Zichor Zichorcha el Pnei Ha'adon Hashem. 3 times in the year, all the males shall appear before Hashem. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, neither shall the fat of my feast remain all night until morning. But then this is what it says. It says, Reshit Bikore Ad Marcha.
Tell me real fast, where are you reading from right now?
I'm reading from Exodus.
Okay, got it.
From Parshat Mishpatim.
Oh, okay.
And it says, Reshit Bikore Ad Marcha, Tavi Beit Hashem Elokecha, Lo Tivashel Gedi Bechalev Imo. the choicest first fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of Hashem your God. And then it says, and you shall not see the kid in its mother's milk. So it's interesting that it has Bikurim connected to the idea of the separation of milk and meat. So it talks about this not just in our Parsha, but it talks about this in Mishpatim, going back to the book of Exodus. So it says we're to go to the Kohen on duty at that time. We're to announce our presence and present him with this basket. And he takes it and he places it before the altar. And then we're to recite that Bikurim passage. Now, if we look also back earlier in the book of Devarim in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 7, it says this. It says, for Hashem, your God, brings you into a good land, a land of brooks, of water, of fountains and depths, springing forth in valleys and hills. And this is where the next verse speaks about the types of fruits. Because I mentioned before that it says to bring the choicest of first fruits, but it doesn't say the fruits. And in Judaism, we understand this not to mean just any fruit, but particular fruits. And what are those? They're the 7 species that are spoken of in Devarim chapter 8. Because as I just read, it talked about the brooks of water and fountains of depths springing forth in valleys and hills. And then verse 8 says, a land of wheat, of barley, vines, meaning grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and trees of honey. So there you have the 7 species that Eretz Yisrael are known for, and this is what it's talking about. And then it goes on in verse 9 and says, a land wherein you shall eat bread without scarceness, you shall not lack anything, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayst dig brass. Okay? So that's how we understand those 7 fruits. So we know that Bikurim were placed in the basket. From a gematria standpoint, when we look at this, the numeric value comes out to 60. 9 plus 50 plus 1 is 60. And the Baal HaTurim, who's one of the Chazal, one of the sages, points out that the recommended amount to give as Bikurim is 1/60th. You're supposed to give 1/60th of your harvest.
Wow. Okay.
So it's said of Bikurim that to do this mitzvah, that we do it for in its merit, we enter into the land, which is what we've been reading in these first couple of verses. Now, the Ari HaKadosh, the Ari Zal, who's a well-known Kabbalist, the Ari lived here in Tzfat and wrote his commentary on the Zohar, written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's also, I can look out my window and see Mount Meron, Har Meron, which is where his tomb is, where his kever is. And he's been over there. It's an amazing place. So the Ari HaKadosh singles out Bikurim as the mitzvah, which he says is the tikkun for the repair of the meraglim. The meraglim are the spies. So the Ari HaKadosh says that Bikurim is actually the mitzvah, which is the tikkun, the repair for the sin of the spies. What do we read about that? We read about that in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers. Numbers chapter 13, starting in verse 17, it says, Vayishlach otam Moshe, and Moses sent them. Who did he send? Lator et Eretz Canaan. He sent them out to spy the land of Canaan and said to them, get up here to the south and go up into the mountains. In verse 18, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwell there, where they are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it is good or bad, and what cities they are that dwell in, whether in camps or in strongholds. And here's what's really interesting. In the next verse, in verse 20, it says, and what the land is, whether it is fat or lean, whether there is wood therein or not, and be of good courage, and bring of the fruit of the land. Mm-hmm. Now, the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So here's Moshe sending in. So we have the Ari HaKadosh saying that this is a tikkun, a repair for the sin of the spies. And here we have Moshe sending them, Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, sending them in to spy out the land. And he says in verse 20, bring of the fruit of that land when they're going into Canaan. So Bikurim has a Torah-ordained built-in recitation that helps us to focus our thoughts in a particular direction. So with this profession or this recitation, the Jew that goes from Bnei Israel, from the children of Israel, goes, he identifies himself with his Jewish heritage and announces to that priest that he goes to one and all, to the priest there and to everybody around about, the centrality of Eretz Yisrael in God's plan for the people of Israel. Okay?
Okay.
It's one of the mitzvot, Bikurim, that's supposed to be expressly accompanied by simcha, by joy. The joy we are to feel, and it shouldn't be if,
Right.
that we realize that all that we have comes from Hashem. The joy with which we hopefully have for all the mitzvot, not just for the Bikurim. And the thing is that we're actually admonished later on in this parsha that we should always remember to not fail in serving Hashem with joy.
Nice.
So now we have to remember that all the land-related mitzvot are special. And I may touch on this later on, but it's important to make note here that while we're talking about covenant here in this parsha, very specifically about the covenant that Hashem made with Bnei Israel, that the covenant of the land itself was not dependent upon anybody but Hashem. If we remember, when Hashem made this covenant with Avraham Avinu, with Abraham, he put him to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, the covenant of the pieces. Mm-hmm. Why? Because the land is Hashem's, and he gave it to us as an inheritance, and it was not dependent upon us doing anything. We didn't have to fulfill anything. It's not like the Torah, where we learn later on in this parsha, the Tochacha, if you do this, then this will happen. If you don't do this, this will happen. The land is totally different. So all the land-related mitzvot are very special. But Bikurim makes the statement that we are also to be glad here. Being happy about the prospects of being in Eretz Yisrael grants us the zechut to be here, the merit to be here. It's not an easy place to live. I made Aliyah here, and people who read my Facebook page will see me write little funny things about what's going on here. I mean, yesterday or 2 days ago, for instance, we were getting ready to go to bed, and we heard this noise outside, and it was a ticking noise. Now, that's not something you want to hear in Israel. You don't want to hear ticking right outside your window, not at night or any other time.
Right.
But we heard this ticking noise, and I said, okay. I grabbed my flashlight and went down. And our place is 2 levels. We have gardens below, and then we have a staircase that comes up to our merpeset, which is our patio. So halfway down, our water meter is on the side, and sure enough, it was our water meter that was ticking away. Water was just flowing out from the top of the water meter.
Okay.
These are everyday occurrences here. It's whether the plumbing is a problem because the plumbing's over 100 years old, or your water meter is a problem, or you get bad service, or you'd have to deal with bureaucracy. The truth of the matter is that Israel is not an easy place to live. But if you come here with an attitude that everything is going to flow off your back, this joy that we're talking about, then it grants you the zechut, the merit to actually be here.
I heard a really inspiring story, and you're more than likely familiar with the story, probably more so than I am. But I'll tell you what I remember of it. Is it said there was this one student who was really amazed at how this rabbi, no matter what came across him, he always handled it really well and really positive. Mm-hmm. And he asked him, he says, how do you do this? How do you live in such a way that you're able to just really persevere through all the suffering that comes in your life? And he sent him to this one guy way across the globe, almost, or a pretty great distance. And he says, you're going to go to this guy. He says, he will teach you exactly how to endure suffering. Mm-hmm. And so finally he goes up and he meets this guy. And as he comes up, he lives in a really poor place. There's no heating, no air conditioning, no running water. The guy, he walks in, the guy's got like, I don't know, he's got a skin rash, and he's just not doing well under any circumstances. And so finally he approaches the guy, and the guy says, "Welcome, come on in." And he said, so-and-so sent me to come see you because, and he goes, well, what do you, I'm honored. Why would he send you here? And they begin to talk, and he began to tell him all of his life's activities. It was so, oh my gosh. I mean, just listening to the story, I was starting to feel heavy. And I was like, oh my God, his poor soul. And he said, so why did this Talmid Chacham, why did he send you to me? He said, I'm so honored. He goes, because he told me that I should learn from you how to endure suffering and how to have a cheerful heart during suffering. He goes, suffering is, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never suffered a day in my life. And when I heard that, I was like, that really is the essence of it. I mean,
yeah, there's a story about that related to somebody named Gamzu.
That's it.
That's based on the idea. Yeah, you're talking about Gamzu.
That's the story. Yeah, I knew you knew that story.
Gamzu Latova means this also is good. Now, I've changed it. I know you're not supposed to add or subtract. And of course, that concept is not, I mean, the concept is in the Torah, but not that specific story that you're talking about.
Right.
But I've changed it. When I made Aliyah and moved to Israel, I changed it from Gamzu Latova, this also is good, to Gamzu Matuka. Okay? This also is sweet.
Ah, nice.
Because I have to take the idea that everything is sweet. And this is what we're talking about here. So the idea of joyfully thanking Hashem for being here, okay, specifically speaking about this Parsha, okay, Bnei Yisrael thanking Hashem for being here helps repair the opposite attitude that was expressed by the Meraglim, by the spies, and echoed by the multitude, okay, that shared that attitude. And we could take that over to how we should live as well. Not just those of us that live in Eretz Yisrael, but anybody, you know, joyfully remembering that whatever your situation is, and that no matter where you live, that you're doing tikkun by this, that suffering is about tikkun. Everything that we do in life, we hear the concept of tikkun olam, repair of the world. But, you know, there's personal tikkun, especially as we're getting close to Rosh Hashanah. We're coming into the Chagim. You know, it's a time of reflecting on the previous year and then reflecting on what our year is going to be like, that we're going to be written in the Sefer Chaim, the book of life, for another year by Hashem. You know, not the easy route of, you know, the former life that we lived where we said, oh, all we have to do is believe this and, you know, we have a free ride. We can do whatever we want, you know. No, this is the idea of consistently, constantly on a daily basis, recognizing that there's repair that has to go on, that there are character traits that we need to work on. And this is what it's talking about. The sin of the spies that was committed by them is by what they said and what they said about the land when they were displaying these fruits. I mean, think about it. Bikurim is the mitzvah that is performed by what the Bikurim bringer says, okay, and what he displays, fruits that he brought from the land. So see how the beautiful connection there? The spies brought fruit from the land as commanded by Moshe Rabbeinu, and then they made a profession. Now, this is what the Ari HaKadosh is saying. By now bringing this Bikurim and having to make a recitation, a profession in joy, we are making tikkun, okay? And Bikurim is a prime example of what we call Hakarat HaTov, recognition and acknowledgement of the good that Hashem has done for us.
Nice.
Okay? And this has to be applied to the other areas of mitzvot and life in general. It's not just, this is the beauty of Torah. The beauty of Torah is that while this is a very specific mitzvah that we're reading about, look at how it opens up to us the possibilities of us being able to introduce this into other areas of life. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on. The truth is, may we soon be privileged to bring Bikurim again, and to bring Bikurim again, that the Beis HaMikdash would be built again, and we would be able to bring it with great joy to Hashem again. Okay, so that's amazing. The first 4 verses of the Bikurim, the recitation, actually form the main text for the Pesach Seder, because it goes on to then summarize the Egyptian enslavement and then the subsequent exodus from Mitzrayim. And when we get into the 5th verse, when it speaks of our coming to Eretz Yisrael, it corresponds to the 5th term of redemption and is represented by the cup of Eliyahu. We have the cup of Eliyahu that we drink at the Pesach Seder. We all bring Bikurim, including the Levite and including the Ger, the convert, with feelings of joy and thanks to God for all we have. So it goes on in verse 5. It's amazing. We've only done 4 verses so far.
Right.
But this is what happens when you get into Torah. There's just no way of doing it.
Sure.
There's just no way of doing it quickly. So this is always an interesting verse. The 5th pasuk is always the one that, that reaches out to you and says, kind of scratch your head and say, what does this mean?
Okay. Well, so far, I haven't.
And was my father.
Oh wait, you know what? I'm sorry. It may have cut out on me. I thought it went silent for a second.
What's that?
Could you repeat what you just said, please?
Okay, I was saying that it's one of those verses, verse 5 of our parsha, that always kind of has me scratching my head, saying, what does this really mean?
Oh, right.
Because it just it says, and you shall speak to Hashem your God. A wandering Aramean was my father. And he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and he became there a nation, great, mighty, and populous. What does this mean? A wandering Aramean was my father. Because the truth is that it can be viewed many different ways. Okay? Was Yaakov an Aramean? No, we know Lavan, his father-in-law, was an Aramean. And so the verse here implies, according to many of the commentaries, that Lavan, or Laban, was responsible for our going down into Mitzrayim, into Egypt. However, Yaakov Avinu, Jacob returned to his father's house after the time he spent with Lavan, and it was only many years later that he ended up in Mitzrayim, right?
Okay.
So we have different opinions on this, and it's always very interesting to try and figure out what this means exactly. It can mean not just wandering, but it can mean a nomad, Aramean. Okay? So a couple of our sages, Ibn Ezra, Rashbam, and Sforno, refer this to Yaakov because of his unsettled life. The fact that he was an Aramean, that he was a wanderer, and he was a nomad because he had this very unsettled life. But when we go back and we look at the original story about Yaakov going, it says, and Jacob fled into the field of Aram, and Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he kept sheep. This is when he was living with Lavan. Now what's interesting is that the Hebrew for wandering there can also mean to go astray or to be ready to perish. And we see this, I'm just going to give you an example, in Tehillim, in Psalm 119, I think it's the very last verse, I think it's verse 176 of the Psalms. It says, Ta'iti kese oved, bakesh avdecha, ki mitzvotecha lo shachachti. Okay? I have gone astray like a lost sheep. Seek your servant, for I have not forgotten your commandments. This is, of course, David HaMelech.
What verse was
speaking to Hashem. This was Psalm 119, verse 176.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm doing is I'm just giving you an example where that word for oved, the word for a wandering, can also mean to go astray. I'm just giving you an example of it.
And aved also means, doesn't it mean to serve or servant also?
Well, as it's depending on how it's spelled.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's a different spelling.
Oh, okay, got it.
So in the Passover Haggadah, we read about this. We always read about a very similar thing. But in the Passover Haggadah that we read on Passover, which is the telling of the story, it says, an Aramean sought to destroy my father. Right. And then it talks about few in number, which is the 70 neshamot, the 70 souls that went into Mitzrayim. Of course, I can't do a presentation like this, William, without making mention of the fact that, our rivals seem to get that wrong for some reason.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up because I have a question I was avoiding. And if you don't mind, could you touch it real fast?
No, I mean, there's a couple of instances where we read in the book of Acts in the New Testament, or what I like to call the non-Testament, the fact that I think it's Stephen when he's making his speech in Acts chapter 7, there's a couple of errors there, not just about the number, because they give the number of 75, but it also talks about Avraham Avinu. We know in Chayei Sarah, in the Parshat Chayei Sarah, where Avraham negotiates for a kever, for a grave for Sarah, because she has just died, that he goes to Shechem, and he negotiates with the sons of Chet for a kever. However, in Acts chapter 7, not only does it say 75 instead of 70, but it says that he bought the kever in Hebron. Now, there are a lot of people that'll say, oh, well, back then it was close. Well, I got news for you. Nobody squeezed Eretz Yisrael together, and Shechem and Hebron were never close together. Okay? So this is very clearly two very significant errors that we see in the New Testament as it relates to what's actually related in the Tenak, what's related in the Torah.
Okay, one more quick thing before you move on, as if we have all day. Please just touch real quickly on the erroneous thought of how a person could be the first fruits of all mankind and all this other messianic nonsense that's out there. Because they really associate with Jesus / Yeshua with all the feasts.
So the problem with this is that there are oftentimes that that what these people do is they spiritualize that which is literal, and they make literal that which is spiritual. It happens all the time. I see it all the time in my discussions with them. A perfect example would be, and I think I talked about this when I was with you guys in Kingsland, the perfect example would be Yeshayahu, Isaiah 53, in verse 10, which uses the term zerah, that the servant that it's spoken of there, that if he makes himself a sham, that if he takes on guilt or he makes himself a guilt offering, that two things would happen, that he would have zerah, that he would have offspring, and he would have length of days. Now, typically what you'll see happen is people say, Jesus had many, many spiritual offspring. Well, the problem with that is that zerah, in its rendering in the Tanakh, anywhere you see it, is always and in every single case, literally physical offspring. Okay? We're talking about the same thing here. When we're talking about bikurim in the Tanakh and the idea of bringing first fruits, there is no such thing as a spiritual concept of first fruits. Like, in other words, that a person can be first fruits to God, unless we specifically see a situation where Hashem gives us an example like that in the Tanakh.
Right.
So this idea of a person coming and being the first fruits, I'm going to be a contextualist here. In the same way that you can't show me that Jesus was brought as a sacrifice in the way that Hashem asked for a sacrifice to be brought to a particular place where he placed his name in a particular way, the blood applied in a particular way, is the same thing. Jesus was not brought in a basket before anybody, before a Kohen, and no profession was made. And he certainly was not the first fruits of the harvest of the land. So it's nonsense.
Interesting. It's amazing too to see how many stories with Jesus parallel that of Moses in this whole and pretty much all the way across the board. They picture the manger when you actually see pictures of it. It looks like a woven basket sort of a thing too, and it's interesting. It's a real honest.
Well, manger is a really nice way of saying a barn. It's what happens.
Right.
With the animals. So, okay. But back to our parsha.
Yes, sir.
So the commentators point out the following sequence. They say that Lavan deceived Yaakov and gave him Leah as a wife instead of his beloved Rachel, which we know from the story, and that when Yaakov subsequently married Rachel also, there developed a rivalry between the two sisters, which we know about. It's part of the story as well. And that this rivalry transferred to the next generation in the form of the problems between Yosef and his brothers. And we see Yaakov gives him the coat of many colors, or the striped coat, that was used to kind of fan the jealousy that ultimately led to Yosef being sold into slavery. And his descent into Mitzrayim, into Egypt, later brought the whole family down here. So therefore, Lavan is the appropriate beginning of that process. So hence, when the verse says, Arami oved aviv v'ge'ed Mitzrayma, okay, that a wandering Aramean was my father, and that's what caused us to go down to Mitzrayim. That's what it's talking about.
Got it.
So I want to touch on one other point before we move on to what I consider the most important themes of the Parsha.
Okay.
And I always say that a lot. I'll probably say that again because I think everything's an important theme in the Parsha. But,
Absolutely.
From the second Aliyah on, starting in verse 12 in chapter 26, we have something that's called Vidui Ma'aser. Vidui Ma'aser is this confession, a confession that takes place. And the interesting thing is why it says vidui, because after one is completed, the separation and the distribution of truma. Truma is the portion that's separated out for the Levites, okay, that we're supposed to bring. And maaser is this the offering that we bring. There's different types that are brought during the 3rd and the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle. I don't want to focus on that too much because it's, it can get crazy.
Okay.
Maaser is the tithe, okay? So vidui maaser, this confession of the tithe, we read about moving on in the next verses. So why did this jump out? It was interesting to me that I wanted to touch on it real quickly was that it's called vidui maaser, meaning confession of the tithe. And vidui usually is connected to sin. As a matter of fact, my mother-in-law, alavat shalom, who's not with us anymore, I was with her. My wife and I were both with her when she left this world. And one of the things that we do in Judaism is we have a confession called vidui. It's actually a prayer, a confession that we do when somebody's on their deathbed. When somebody's not able to do it, somebody else does it for them. So I read vidui for her. Okay, so typically it implies the concept of sin, and this is why we're confessing to Hashem before we leave this world.
We're in verse 12, right?
We're in verse 12. And it says, I have removed the sacred from my home, and I have given to the Levite, to the stranger, to the orphan, to the widow, as you have commanded. I have neither violated the commandment nor forgotten anything. I have not eaten of the sacred foods improperly, nor have I defiled them in any way. I have listened to Hashem's voice. I have done all that I was commanded. So why would such a statement be referred to as vidui? And I just wanted to introduce this. The Rav, we call him the Rav, Harav Soloveitchik Zatzel, was a modern-day poskim. He was a modern-day, real, very high, lofty rabbi here. A posek is somebody that you go to with very difficult questions of halacha. And he was one of two. There was Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and the Rav. He says that the fact that twice we see in the Hebrew, in these few verses, kechol, and not just kol, but kechol.
According to all, is it?
Right,
Okay.
that this idea of according to all, okay. The statement of vidui maaser, confession of the tithe, declares that the person has done almost all that has been required of him. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he says that I've not eaten thereof in mourning. In verse, I think it's verse 14. Neither have I put away thereof being unclean, nor given thereof for the dead. I have hearkened to the voice of Hashem, my God. I have done according to all that you have commanded me.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, and Sfat Emet, another one of the Chazal, says, I have not transgressed your mitzvot, and I have not forgotten. I have not forgotten that you are the one who has commanded me to do the mitzvot.
Mm-hmm.
And that furthermore, the statement implies that the individual did only that which he was required to do and did not often go beyond the call of duty. This is what the Rav is talking about. This is what the Sfat Emet is talking about. Or perhaps we did the mitzvah sort of like it is supposed to be done. Remember I talked about bediavad l'chachila, that there's a right way and there's kind of a way to kind of just
to get by.
Get by. So maybe we did the mitzvah that was supposed to be done, but we didn't do it with full kavana, with full intent. So these implications might be responsible for this idea of vidui. And this is the reason why I wanted to bring this in, because what an important message that is for us, again, as we approach Rosh Hashanah, when we have to answer for how and what we do as it relates to the mitzvah. Okay, so maybe we have to look at one more thing before we move on.
That's fine. The more, the better. Yeah, like I said, if we need to stretch it a little bit, let's stretch it. You know, I'm not going to try to.
Well, I want to conserve time too, because I know that you're a busy guy as well. You know, but try and get in as much as we can get in the time that we have.
Sounds good, Ira.
When we move on, we see very short in the third aliyah, just 4 verses, chapter 26, verse 16 to 19. And this short portion is just a summary really of our relationship with God. It basically talks about that we're to keep, preserve, observe, practice all the mitzvot, the statutes, the laws, which Moshe has reiterated for us with all our heart and all our souls. We've pledged allegiance to Hashem, promised to follow his ways and to listen to him. And he pledges to take us as his, chosen nation and to elevate us above the nations of the world. And in quotation marks, capital letters, if we keep his mitzvot. And that's an important thing to notice, that many times what we read in the Tanakh is that, yes, Hashem set apart a nation, and yes, he elevated this nation, and yes, and of course, I want people to understand from the get-go, when I talk about these things, I'm not talking about elevated in any other way. The only thing that I say that we're special, the Jewish people, is that we're special for a reason. We're special because of the nations. We're set apart specifically so that Hashem could give a nation this Torah in order for us to be able to elucidate the Torah to the nations. Okay?
Awesome.
So, when we talk about this, to follow in God's footsteps means to develop and practice various traits that are attributed to God. This is why I wanted to stop here on these couple of verses for a reason. And we call these midot in Hebrew, which literally means a measure or a norm. But it can also has the meaning of values, of virtues, or it's related to character traits. So when we read that Hashem is called merciful, we're called to be merciful as well. In the same way that he's called holy, he tells us to be holy as well. So from general traits, we can also use specific examples. God clothes the naked, he visits the sick, he buries the dead, he comforts the grieving, so forth and so on. So this is another one, a very important theme in there, that when we talk about taking on this relationship Hashem, and that he elevates us for a reason. And this is not just talking to us, I believe, to the Jewish people. I think it's talking to all people that want to have this relationship with Hashem, that especially, again, as we're coming into Rosh Hashanah, to the Chagim, that we understand that this is what we need to work on, these midot, these character traits. Finally, we get to one of the things that I love in this parsha, and that's the erection of the stones. Okay.
What verse are we going to begin?
Starting in chapter 27, verse 1, where Moshe Rabbeinu and the elders command the people concerning the inscribing of the Torah on stones. Okay.
Now, okay. Sorry, I had a question, but I just realized it was not in context. It's totally off base.
Okay.
If I can remember, I'll ask you before we close out.
All right. So I'm going to try and get through this really quickly, because I know we want to try and get this done. I've
got the Hebrew on the screen, so that way they can follow along if they need to.
Okay, so I will go to the Hebrew in just a little bit.
Okay.
So we see the erection of stones and the inscribing of the Torah on these stones. And subsequently, another set of pillars is to be erected and inscribed on Har Eval, where an altar is to be built, an altar of whole uncut stones, and then sacrifices are to be offered there. This is where we see the Tochacha that we see later in the Parsha, you know, where the people will stand on Gerizim and Eval, the two mountains, and have these things, have this read to them, and they'll say Amen to what's being read. So Moshe and the Kohanim next declare to the people that they've grown into complete nationhood at this point, with all the mitzvot of the Torah having been reviewed. I'm kind of giving you an overview of this part of the Parsha. And Moshe, the Kohanim, and the Levim say to all the people, on this very day, you have become God's nation. Now Rashi says that the Torah emphasized this very day to teach us our commitment to Torah and mitzvot should be as if we've entered into the covenant with Hashem this very day. That every day we are challenged to refresh our Judaism and our connection to Hashem constantly.
You know, that makes me think of something regarding like the relationship I've got with my wife, and how much more so should we do with Hashem. But my wife and I've been married for, you know, over 15 years, and her and I both, we're still just in awe of each other. And it's like, you know, and I think the reason why is because we make that choice every day to approach this like it's a new fresh start every single day.
Absolutely. And this is why we were taught as young children in Judaism that we were to based on also in Devarim and Deuteronomy, where we read about, and you are standing this day, you, and it goes through a whole list of people. And it says not just those who are here today, but those who are not here today. I was taught as a young child in Judaism, in Cheder, in Hebrew school, that I was to live my life as if I stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah. Okay? Nice. And along with that concept, this concept of refreshing my Judaism, my desire to have a relationship with Hashem and the mitzvot on a daily basis. So what do we read? We read here, and Moshe and the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, Asher anochi mitzaveh etchem hayom.
What verse
keep all the commandments. This is verse 1, I believe, of chapter 28.
Oh, okay, got it.
I believe, yeah.
Okay, got it.
והיה ביום אשר תעברו את הירדן אל הארץ אשר השם אלוקיך נותן לך, והקמת לך אבנים גדולות וסדת אותם בסיד. And it shall be on the day when you pass over the Jordan unto the land which Hashem your God gives you, that you shall set up great stones and plaster them with plaster. And then it goes on, and you shall write upon them all the words of this law. Okay. V'chatavta alehen et kol divrei haTorah.
Okay. I was trying to follow you, but I think I lost you. Tell me what verse you're reading from.
Divrecha, verse 3.
28, verse 3.
26, verse 3.
26. Oh.
Yeah, I think I'm in 26. No?
Okay. I was wondering why my words weren't matching up. I was
because you're probably looking at it in English.
Well, I've got the Hebrew up, but because they don't line up all the ways. Okay, so you're in 26:3, not 28:3. Got it.
I am in no. Where am I?
Oh. I was thinking you were in 27.
27. I'm sorry.
That's First, good.
Chapter 27.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, my bad.
That's all right.
I hate that phrase, but I said it.
Okay.
That's why I said it, because I hate it.
Got it. Okay. Okay, now I'm with you. Go ahead.
Sorry. So, and you shall write upon them all the words of this Torah, et kol divrei haTorah, zot be'avrecha. When you passed over, that you may go into the land which Hashem your God gives you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as Hashem, the God of your fathers, has promised you. Verse 4, and it shall be when you passed over the Jordan, and you shall set up these stones which I command you this day in Mount Eval, and you shall plaster them with plaster, and there you shall build an altar unto Hashem your God, an altar of stones, and you shall lift up no iron tool upon them. You shall build the altar of your God of unhewn stones, and you shall offer burnt offerings unto Hashem your God. Verse 7, and you shall sacrifice peace offerings, and shall eat there, and shall rejoice before the Lord your God. Verse 8, and you shall write clearly or plainly upon the stones all the words of this Torah. Okay, so those were 27, verse 1 through 8.
Okay.
So Moshe and the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, keep all the mitzvah, which I am commanding you so far. I don't need to go over and over this again. And you shall write on the stones all the words of this Torah very clearly. So let us consider this most unusual mitzvah, the writing of a Torah, not in the normal manner, but instead on stones. Because what's the normal manner? The normal manner, I believe you have a Torah there. William, right? And
yes,
your
sir.
Torah is written on parchment, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's written on parchment. And that's typically what we do. It's typically written on the skin of a kosher animal, but yet it's written on stone here. And the fundamental difference holds the key to understanding the purpose of this one-time mitzvah, which was performed as Klal Yisrael, all of Israel entered the land. And so I want to get a little spiritual here for a minute.
Okay.
I once heard it said that the following is the purpose of the Sefer Torah, is to fix the ideas contained therein firmly in the heart of the writer. And this is expressed by the verse in Mishlei in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 3, that says, write them upon the tablet of your heart.
Nice.
Okay? So we know that parchment is used for a Sefer Torah and is intended to reflect this idea. You know, the hide of the animal must first be treated before the writing may commence. If anybody wants to Google, they can Google and they'll see that, you know, the skin has to be treated first. If it's not, the whole exercise is futile. It won't work. So it really symbolizes the need for preparation before the Torah can be successfully received. So just as the skin needs refining before the writing will be valid, so too one needs to take steps to remove any traces of personal defilement beginning before we try to develop anything in Torah. Now, so the problem with this is that Torah study itself, which enables the person to overcome these characteristics, how do we do it? If learning Torah is the thing that helps us to cleanse ourselves to defiling, and yet we have to prepare ourselves before Torah study, then we're kind of in this conundrum, no?
Right.
Because the Zohar Kadosh, the Zohar says, come and see. No man is ever purified except with the words of Torah. So how do we break this cycle? So it seems that to achieve purification, one needs Torah, but to learn Torah, one needs to be purified. So let's look at this spiritual concept for a minute, or what I call the two aspects of the soul. I like to talk about this a lot, about the difference between the neshama and the nefesh. The neshama being our elevated soul, that divine spark that Hashem placed within us, as opposed to the animalistic soul, the nefesh, the seat of our emotions. So, and that's the way really how we resolve this difficulty that I'm talking about. Because the deepest and most fundamental aspect is the seat of the divine soul, and this is completely undefilable. In other words, we can't defile that soul that Hashem placed within us. The only thing that can be really defiled is our nefesh, is our animalistic soul. Okay?
Okay.
It's the secondary aspect, which we're really called on to purify, and that's that animalistic nature. And this will enable us to accept and retain Torah knowledge and ideas. The way this works really should be clear, and it really comes down to the idea that the inner aspect of the heart is always capable of instigating a program of Torah study and mitzvah observance. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, the neshama, the divine soul within us, has no problem setting up a program of Torah study and mitzvah observance. That's what we have to do. What we have to do is elevate that divine nature within us, so that then what that does is it kind of overflows into that nefesh in us, okay, which then kind of acts together as one.
It's like the portals have to line up technically for it to work, right?
Because without this prior purification, nothing positive will result. And this is, I think, sometimes why people say, I study, and I don't get this, I don't understand it. This is a spiritual concept that people need to get, that in the same way that the cloth, the parchment, has to be prepared in a certain way in order for the scribe, the sofer, to be able to write the Torah scroll, is the same way that we need to prepare ourselves spiritually to set up that Torah study, but not only but allow that divine nature in us to take over and to really purify the less divine nature, the less divine soul that we have within us, so that they work together.
It's neat that you use that alignment idea, because a lot of people will definitely kind of get this idea with this, like a scope on a gun. It's got the glass on the front, the glass on the back, and you can be looking through it, but if you're looking through it slightly crooked, all you see is black. And you really have to have perfect alignment to get the most out of that scope. And so what you're saying is, when we do our Torah study, we should really prepare ourselves and to really just isolate it, just get ready to focus, and not just do it to do it, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you walk away from it and you wonder why you haven't retained.
Right.
Let's say. Perfect. Because it really isn't written on the tablet of your heart, because the tablet of your heart really is that divine neshama. The neshama comes from this idea of nishmat chaim. It says that Hashem, when he created man, when he created Adam, nishmat chaim, he blew breath into the nostrils of man. And so from nishmat, from breath, is where we get the concept of neshama, that God blew the neshama into man.
I got it.
That this separates us from the animal world, in that we have a neshama, we have an elevated soul, we have a nefesh that desires to eat and sleep and drink and so forth. The cats out of my pesed do that as well, but they don't have a neshama, they don't have an elevated soul where Hashem blew the breath of life into them.
Wow.
So really, in essence, the animal world is subject to change. The passage of time affects the animal, and the process of nature assure that a certain period of the animal's cells are replenished. We have this as well. This symbolizes the outer part of the heart, which is also subject to change. For through the influence of the inner, that undefilable part, it can be improved and sanctified. However, the inner, intrinsically holy part of the personality is unchanging and unchangeable. And as such, it's represented by stone. This is where we get back to the stones, which is the least changing entity in the creation. So when Klal Yisrael were about to enter Yisrael into Canaan, they were making a new start in a new land. They needed a tangible reminder of the correct way in which to begin their service to Hashem. So God required them to erect stones and to write the text of the Torah upon them. And this indicates that the first element of divine service comes from the innermost, unchanging part of the personality. They were to try and arouse the holy attachment to Torah, which lay deep within them, and allow it to pervade and purify the rest of their personalities. This is why I believe Hashem had them stand there, hear it all, erect these stones, write it on stones, so that it would be a reminder to them, not only of the stones, but what it was supposed to mean to them as well.
Unbelievable. Yeah, right.
So basically, we learned from this act is that Bnei Yisrael were to make a statement that they had taken possession of the land based on their covenant with God. And like I said, not based on the covenant of the land, because that didn't require anything to them, but based on their own faithfulness to the covenant. And of course, it's based over and over again on this idea of if. If. So I want to go back to verse 2. Because it says in verse 2, and it shall be, v'haya bayom asher ta'avu et hayarden, and it shall be on the day. There's two things that I want to see, two phrases here, is on the day, and then when it says avanim gedolot, great stones. When we read in that verse, on the day, many of the commentators think this refers to what we read in the book of Yehoshua, in Joshua chapter 4. In Joshua chapter 4, I'm going to try and read it in English because I know, I want to be, I want to keep on time here for you.
Okay, sure.
So starting in verse 1, it says, "It came to pass when all the nation were clean, passed over the Jordan, Jordan, I'm sorry, I'm saying Yarden and Jordan together, that Hashem spoke unto Joshua, saying, Take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe, a man, and command them, saying, Take you hence out of the midst of the Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood, 12 stones made ready, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the lodging place where you shall lodge this night." So here we have in Yehoshua, in Joshua, it's talking about taking 12 stones out of the Jordan. And so a lot of the commentators think that that's what Hashem was talking about when he talks about both on that day and these great stones. And in the next verse, going back to our Parsha, in verse 3, it says, "And you shall write upon them all the words of this Torah, when you have passed over, that you may go into the land which the Lord your God has given you, Hashem has given you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as Hashem, the God of your fathers, has promised you." So some claim that this was only a brief summary of the Torah that was written on the stones. But now that we go to Yehoshua and we see that it was 12 stones, I think that if we look forward, that we'll see that that's not true. Because I think they didn't think it was possible for all of the Torah to be written. However, with the discovery, I don't know if you've ever studied or looked at the Code of Hammurabi.
I've heard about it.
Okay, so the Code of Hammurabi actually has 232 paragraphs. It has an introduction and a conclusion. It consists of about 8,000 words engraved on one man-sized stone. And it can be seen that the laws of Devarim, Deuteronomy, or even the whole Torah can indeed be written on the 12 stones of Yehoshua that we read about. Further, there's another inscription called the Behistun inscription that was written by Darius the Great, which is in Iran. And if you look, it's actually written on the side of a mountain. It's actually 50 feet, I want to say it's like 50 feet high and 82 feet long.
Wow.
This inscription. So therefore, some of our sages like Ibn Ezra and Saadia Gaon hold that all the 613 precepts of the Torah were written on those 12 stones. We move on in verse 5, and it says, "And there shall you build an altar to Hashem your God, an altar of stones, and you shall not lift up, you shall lift up no iron tool upon them." So after the erection of the stones with the Torah inscription on it, there's the institution of public worship with the building of an altar. And we look back in Exodus, in the book of Shabbat, in chapter 20, I believe it's verse 21, it says, "And you shall make me an altar of stone, and you shall not build, thou shalt not build it of hewn stones, for you will not lift a tool upon it, lest it be profaned." And then verse 22, "Neither shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not uncovered therein." So no tool was used, and the reason for that is because iron tools were considered tools of war. We see that in the book, I believe, and also in Melachim Aleph in 1 Kings, it talks about that, I think in chapter 6.
Does that mean they could actually make tooling out of something besides iron? Like
either
flint,
that or they could not. The implication, at least in the Beis HaMikdash, when Shlomo Melech built the temple, there was some thought that any tooling that was done in the quarry, but not in the area of the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, anything that would have been hewn would have been done far, far away from where the building was. Now, I don't know what the implication is, but he very clearly says that the altar that you build here should not be used with iron tools. And the reason for that is because iron tools at that time were considered tools of war, tools of destruction, and tools of division. And since this altar was meant to bring peace based on the offerings that were brought and really promoting peace between Bnei Israel and their Father in heaven, he didn't want it to be polluted in that way. Hashem didn't want there to be seen as any kind of destruction or division or warlike materials to be used in the building of it. It goes on in verse 6 to say, "Avanim shlemot." Stones, avanim are stones. Again, we saw avanim gedolot, great stones. Now we see avanim shlemot, tivneh. And this is talking about the stones that were to be used for the altar. Interesting that it used avanim shlemot. Why does it use that? It actually means complete stones, so to speak, as unhewn stones. But it comes from the same root as shalom. So we can imply here that these were to be stones or peaceful stones.
Interesting.
Complete stones or peaceful stones. And this is where it gets to the idea of not using tools related to. And then verse 7, it says, and you shall sacrifice peace offerings. Again, we see peace there. And shall rejoice before Hashem your God. And then in verse 8, it says, V'chatva al ha'avanim et kol dirvei haTorah hazot be'er hetev. And you shall write upon the stones all the words of this law very plainly or very clearly. What does that mean, be'er hatev? So we're back here to the stones that contain the Torah and not the stones of the altar. And our rabbis teach a very deep concept of this idea of be'er hatev, that it refers to the law being written clearly to be understood by the 70 languages. Why 70 languages? Because it was taught that there were 70 nations. This is kind of curious when you think about it. Moshe's audience are the children of the generation that had left Mitzrayim, that had left Egypt. They had grown up in the desert speaking Hebrew, the Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language. What's the need for translations into 70 languages? So a couple of the sages speak about this. One says that it tells us that when God spoke at Mount Sinai, that each of the commandments split into 7 parts and then again split into 70 parts, corresponding to the 70 languages of the 70 nations. Another, on a midrash, explains that when Moshe ascended Har Sinai, that he received during the 40 days the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, which elucidated for him the 70 aspects and underlying meanings of each word.
You know, my question earlier actually even furthers my understanding of the need for an oral Torah. The question that I asked you, because it wasn't clear. I mean, why would it be needed to put iron in there if the whole idea was any tool? Why did it specify iron? You know,
right. And the Talmud actually speaks about that. The Talmud, the Gemara, speaks about the idea that an iron tool refers to tools of war, tools of division, and tools of destruction, which we wouldn't know.
Right.
Without that.
And the other thought was Moses was up on the mountain 3 times, right?
Yes. Well, there's different opinions on that as well.
Well, we'll say 2 times just conservatively, right? And so 2 times 40 days, that's 80 days, times 24 hours. I mean, and I mentioned this before, but you could literally read the entire Hebrew and Christian scriptures in a period of 72 hours. So if he was up there for well over 2,000 hours, or do the math, I don't know what that number is.
Yeah,
they had been talking about something.
Not only that, but it's the idea that when you consider, William, that not only that, but he also had to come down and he had to instruct his brother, the Kohen HaGadol, Aharon, and he had to instruct his sons, and he had to give them detailed instructions on the Mishkan, on how they were to prepare. There's no way that we have all those details written in the written Torah without Torah Shebal Peh, without the oral Torah. Okay? So when we think about this, these nuances corresponded to the 70 languages of the nations. And we also have this concept of the Torah having 70 facets, that every word in the Torah, that when you look at the Torah, when you look at a concept in the Torah, you're looking at a diamond, basically. And if you look at a diamond, the diamond has different facets. And depending on how you look at it, you'll see it in different ways. Really, this comes down to the concept of Torah for the nations. The Netivot Olam tells us that the Torah was given at Sinai and then revealed to Moshe again in the tabernacle in the desert, and that both these revelations were specifically for the children of Israel. But this third time, because you said 3, on the plains of Moab, the Torah is explained by Moshe in 70 languages and written the way it was written on these stones, so that Bnei Israel would be able to communicate it to the nations of the world. So then now we can understand that any translation of the Torah is considered a commentary and explains only one aspect of the Torah, and that there are 69 other messages that need to be learned from this idea. This is the job that we're talking about of teachers. This is the job of rabbis. This is why we went from this concept of, let me stop there for a minute.
Sure.
And I'll say this. In other words, this message of Torah was for all the children of men. However, the use of Be'er HaTev demands that the words of Torah are clearly elucidated. How does that happen? This gave rise to the school of the Soferim, the school of the scribes. It was their job to read the book of Torah and to cause the people to understand it. And we have a perfect example of this in the book of Nehemiah. In the book of Nehemiah, in chapter 8, starting in verse 5, this is when all the people gathered together, when Ezra found this book of the law, of the Torah of Moshe, that Moshe had received from Hashem. And it says in verse 5, in Nehemiah 8, and Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was above all the people, and when he opened it, all the people stood up. And Ezra blessed Hashem, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen va'amen, with the lifting up of their hands, and they bowed their heads and fell down before Hashem with their faces to the ground. And then it goes on to describe the other Levites that were there. And it says this at the end. It says, even the Levites caused the people to understand the Torah, and the people stood in their place. And verse 8, and they read in the book the law of Hashem distinctly, and they gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading. Mm. And really, while there are a lot of people that don't like this answer, William, the scribes of yesterday have become the rabbis of today.
Right.
Because the rabbi of today is the one that expounds on the Torah in the synagogue for us. He's the one that applies it to everyday needs and problems, and is the one who helps us to perpetuate this teaching to our children. Sure. And so really, we then go into forward from this, the Tochacha. No, we don't have a lot of time. So really what happens is we go into this Tochacha, and Hashem has each of the division of the tribes to stand on Evel and Grizim and to hear this read. Okay, to hear these words read. And in the same way that the people in the time of Nehemiah said Amen va'amen, the people all also had to say at this time Amen va'amen. Mm. Now, I'll leave you with this. Amen in the Gematria comes out to the number 91. Hashem's name as it is written, 10 plus 5 plus 6 plus 5 equals 26. And God's name as it's pronounced is 1 plus 4 plus 50 plus 10 equals 65. And 65 and 26 is 91. And the Baal HaTurim teaches us that he who answers Amen is greater than the one who says the bracha, because Amen is the double form of God's name when we pronounce Amen. So when you say Amen, recognize that when you hear the Torah elucidated and you say Amen with your hands raised to Hashem, you're even greater than the person who makes that recitation and makes that profession of the bracha.
Unbelievable. Ira, it was an absolute pleasure. I really, really enjoyed this.
It's my honor. Please.
I'm looking forward to many more Parshot ahead with you. We'll see you in another 8 weeks. Pretty much, we'll figure out the dates. Maybe sooner if I need to fill in. I don't have all 8 slots filled yet, and that's fine. So as long as you're available, we will definitely pull you into this thing. And but it's been great. I'm really excited about this new series. And once again,
Amen.
Amen.
I hope it was a blessing.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Tavo by our dearly beloved friend, Ira Michelson from Israel. Ira, shalom, shalom. And we'll talk to y'all soon. Shalom.
אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד חשוב מכל חשוב, הכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה.